New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. Our topic today is consciousness in the martial arts, and my guest, George Leonard, is an Aikido teacher. In addition, he is a former senior editor of Look magazine, a consulting editor to Esquire magazine, and the author of numerous books, including The Transformation, The Silent Pulse, Education and Ecstasy, and The Ultimate Athlete. Welcome, George.
Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. In your work with Aikido, you pay a lot of attention to the notion of energy and being sensitive to the energy field around the human body. Could you talk a little bit about that? It's a notion I think a lot of people in the West particularly are not too familiar with.
Well, I don't think there's any question that there is an energy field around the body. First of all, there's a heat field. It can be seen on infrared film. You can measure the heartbeat, an electromagnetic field, a great distance from the body. There's an electrostatic field around the body. We are surrounded by an olfactory bubble. We can smell each other. That's another field. And then, of course, there are those putative fields of the Eastern religions, the various soul sheaths and auras and so forth. But I think that, as Alan Watts once said, that we are not skin-encapsulated egos. In fact, the skin is one of the lesser boundaries between the self and the universe. Close your eyes and then you can become one with the universe. Now, many of the martial arts, as you perhaps know, have had claims of the paranormal.
Yes.
You've heard the story of the ki, the great shout by which a martial arts master can bring a sparrow down from a tree.
Ha! Like that.
Yeah, something like that. Or put your hands like that, and then against the wall you see the sizzling fingerprints and handprint against the wall.
And of course, it seems that it's always the oldest, frailest masters who are the most powerful.
That's right.
And at least in the movies.
It's true, though. It's really true. Aikido has found it's probably the most recent and the most sophisticated and, according to Scientific American, the most difficult to master of the modern martial arts, of all the martial arts, really. It was created, shall we say, evolved out of other martial arts in the mid-1920s by a remarkable Japanese warrior named Morihei Ueshiba. We call him O-sensei, meaning great teacher. And I'll just refer to him as O-sensei. That's much easier. But Aikido is a radical attempt. It really goes back to the samurai. The moves in Aikido are the moves of samurai swordsmanship, basically, and jiu-jitsu. But O-sensei, when he was a very powerful young man, and that's when he was still used his muscle force.
Has a lot to do with balance, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. Balance and centeredness. But he was engaged in a duel with an admiral with swords, and the admiral was injured. This is way back in the 1920s in Japan. O-sensei was filled with remorse. He went on a 1 year's retreat, and then in the typical Enlightenment story, he was seeking some mode of martial art that would create not discord in the world, but harmony.
This is before he developed Aikido.
Yeah, he was in the process of developing it. The great moment is about to come now. You know, it's just like the movies, really, just like the television series. He was in his back garden, and suddenly the whole world turned golden. The persimmon tree beneath which he was sitting, the well, everything turned golden, and he was enlightened. And what he found was a martial art that was really based on harmony. The word "I" in Japanese is a character, a kanji that goes like this rather than like this. And Jeffrey, you know that most of our culture is built on this. Push, push back.
You mean like a game of chess or a football field, two teams lining up against each other, pushing at each other like that. Yeah.
I've given workshops to 40,000 people in the discipline I've developed out of Aikido. And I always ask this question, what do you do when somebody pushes you? The first answer invariably has been, this is 40,000 people, push back. And it's really a very stupid thing to do. Aikido is going with the flow and this is all going to make some sense about consciousness in just a minute. Stay with me.
I'm with you.
It is really understanding, and deeper than understanding, intuiting, becoming one with the energy and intention, the intentionality of the attacker. You literally have to understand that fully as an attack comes into you. Whatever kind of attack it is, it could be a psychological attack, a physical attack, a blow this way, a blow this way.
I've heard that when I was a child about jiu-jitsu. The idea is that you use the force of your opponent against them.
That's right, but see, you still watch your language, against them.
Ah,
So Aikido is more radical than that.
okay.
Judo is you push, I pull. You pull, I push. Aikido is not that. You push, I blend. I become one with you. If we weren't locked to these chairs, I'd jump up and show you. But you'd come towards me, I make a kind of a sweeping, spiral-like move and come around and end up looking at the world from your viewpoint. In other words, to say it more clearly, looking at the world from the attacker's viewpoint. Oh, that's how you see it. And so from that vantage point, you then have your options multiply tremendously.
It's almost like telepathy in a sense then.
Yeah, we're getting there. Push, push back, there are three possible outcomes. If I push you, you push back. I can win, I can lose, or there can be a stalemate. We've got the cerebral cortex, the most complex entity in the known universe, and we've come up with a basic way of dealing with problems, out of which there are three possible outcomes, all of which are no good. Once you have blended with somebody, you retain those outcomes, but you have about 10,000 more physically. And the same thing is true psychologically, socially, sexually, whatever.
In other words,
So-
you're dealing with a concept of unity.
Exactly. Literally in Aikido, if I attacked you, you would intuit, okay, you would tune into, sense, understand, almost an extraordinary sensing, what my intentions are. You would make a move to blend with me, to join with me like two rivers coming together and joining, look at the world from my viewpoint, and then you can deal with me any number of ways. You have a whole spectrum of responses, from controlling you with a wrist lock, to embracing you, to going home and leaving the fight. That's a wonderful solution. Real black belt solution is to get out of the fight.
But it almost sounds a little bit too perfect, George. I mean, we're
Oh, it doesn't work
fallible
that way.
human beings.
Oh, it's very hard to do. That's why Aikido is so difficult. You don't always blend, you know, you try to blend, but it is quite remarkable. Now, since in Aikido, it's not just simply chess. It's not you punching me, I counter that punch, I punch you back. I have to be more sensitive than usual in order to see what you really have in mind, so I have to blend with you. I think because of that, Aikido masters, I do not include myself in that category.
You call yourself a teacher of
Yes,
Aikido.
I hold a third degree black belt, but that's still, we always say, people think, oh, a black belt, that's something marvelous. I consider a black belt in martial arts a license to learn. That's when you really start learning. So anyway, a real Aikido master literally can sense things from a distance, can feel things. And what has happened out of Aikido is that from the very practice itself, without any conscious intention to do this, it's almost inevitable that you will start having kinds of sensing which would be called paranormal, extraordinary, whatever. Now you see that in our world we call that quite normal. So with that in mind, I and some other teachers of Aikido have developed practices called energy awareness, and in my case we call it Leonard Energy Training, L-E-T, LET, that's pretty nice. So, and with this training we teach alternative ways of dealing with daily life situations, stress, conflict. Some of these are quite practical, ordinary things, and we use simple movement exercises with two people, sometimes more than two people, and these are things which come out of a very powerful martial art, which can be performed by ordinary people who haven't had the training, don't know how to fall, don't know the very complicated coordination and so forth.
You seem to be saying, in effect, that the same skill that one might use in a martial art is really the basic skill that one might use for lovemaking.
Exactly. Or anything, or dealing with somebody who's a hostile driver. You use all the same things. So, I and some other people have been going around teaching this kind of thing. This is the 40,000 people I told you about. Those are not Aikidoists. We have a school in Mill Valley, Aikido of Tamalpais, but you have about 100 students at the most at any one time.
Yeah.
But
And that's a
40,000
lot.
people, that's a lot, right, for an Aikido school. But Now, as we started working on this, just normally, out of the very flow of things, in other words, Jeffrey, we couldn't help ourselves. We start doing very extraordinary things. For example, we start finding that we can close our eyes, and by scanning like this, by becoming centered and scanning like this, we can find people anywhere on the room, and we can pick out one person from another person.
In other words, from a distance of many, many feet, you can...
It doesn't matter the distance. The distance seems to be irrelevant.
Like a dowser searching for oil underground, or a remote viewer.
Exactly. And so, in my
book... You use your body.
We use a body. Now, I often say that, you know, the hands are just induction devices. Actually, you don't even need to use your hands. But it's nicer to have a hand up there. In other words, my basic theory that I put forward in the Silent Pulse, which probably goes along with your thinking too, is that we are all connected.
Yeah.
You've talked about that with Michael Scriven and others. We're connected, that we don't need to have a carrier wave. I think so much of the objections to psychic phenomena have to do with the inability to locate or identify, isolate a carrier wave. This conception I have is more like the quantum physics conception, or holonomy, like a hologram.
We're already part of whatever it is
it's
we're
structural.
seeking. Yeah.
I mean, I can find that other person because that's part of my basic structure.
So if I can digress for a second,
Sure.
if some people use a dowsing rod, some people use tarot cards, some people use a crystal ball, some people use astrology, some people use herbs or tea leaves or the I Ching, what you're suggesting is that these are all just devices to help us get back to the essential underlying reality of it all. And martial arts is one such device, which I suppose has the added advantage of allowing a person to really become familiar with their body, which is the basic instrument.
Right. I call all of these induction devices. Induction to lead into. They lead us into what we already know, as Plato said. The most that any teacher can hope to do is to remind you of what you already know. So I do think the body is a good one, though. It's a wonderful antenna. It's fully instrumented, has thousands of feedback circuits. The feedback is instantaneous. You do not have to wait for a computer printout. It's right there. You don't have to carry instructions around. They're right in your body. But we can locate people at a distance. Another thing, I also have a training in which we certify other trainers and teachers of LET, Leonard Energy Training. All of those have to be able to, blindfolded on a cloudy day outside, have to be able to find magnetic north. And they have to find it not approximately. They'll do like this, and I'll take the compass just to give them one of these so-called reality checks. We believe compasses, we don't believe but anyhow, what I do, I say, now, which finger shall I put the compass on? And they'll say the middle finger. I put it on, it has to be right to the degree. Now, what I found out is that this does not take an Aikido master to do this. We can all do this.
Find magnetic north. This is a magnetic sensitivity.
Yeah, we can find magnetic north. Or you could say it's part of the basic structure of our culture and our environment, our world, our planet. It's there.
Well, our
it's
bodies are like magnets, actually. So there's no reason that we shouldn't be conscious of that. But finding another person, that must be something a bit different.
Yeah, well, I didn't, once you came to our Aikido
I sure
school,
did, yes.
And I think we did that experiment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in which we go through a lot of induction of, we make an energy ball between us, and we talk about this representing the inner pulse, the particular pulse, and then trying to create a new energy field that is a sum of, and greater than the sum of, the two energy fields. And we read aloud together.
You let us into it step by step.
Read aloud together, and that your breathing is synchronized, your subtle movements, micro movements become synchronized, and perhaps your brain waves become synchronized, and your heartbeat does become synchronized. And then we have everybody wander around at random with the eyes soft, just looking at nothing in particular, soft eyes. I clap my hands, everybody turns and finds their partner. Okay, then we walk around with our eyes closed so you can only see people's feet. And I clap my hands, they find their partner. Then we walk around with our eyes really almost closed where you just can barely see. When I clap my hands, you close your eyes totally, swing around as much as you want to until you find your partner. Now, the amazing thing about that is that everybody doesn't always get it. But when I ask afterwards, how many, this is not scientific because obviously subjective. We don't call it a scientific experiment. We call it an experience and connectedness. So we ask, and generally 95% at least have made a direct contact 1 out of 3 times. I normally have them do it with the eyes totally closed 3 times.
That would be statistically significant.
Rather impossible in terms of, I mean, to be really clicked right in.
Yeah.
1 time out of 3. About half of them do it 2 times out of 3, and maybe 10% do it 3 times
And
out of 3.
in your worldview, this is normal. This is not considered paranormal
right
at all.
And then we all have our own way of replicating the remote viewing experiments put off in TARG at SRI. And what I add to this is I add a lot of induction and people getting to know each other through this energy, what we call the energy dimension.
Yes.
And this, you know, Jeffrey, it might simply be that nothing mysterious is going on except that we are simply reducing their disbelief.
So you
by
don't
creating
really
this.
have a concept of the paranormal.
No, it's all normal. In other words, obviously other cultures have reinforced for that. We reinforce against this kind of sensing because it is very frightening. And as I wrote in the Silent Pulse, I would not like to have mental bending be a very common capacity of human beings, because until we've all learned to be a little better people, shall I say that, or more centered, more balanced, less ego-driven people. You know, think of the crazies out there with guns using metal to kill people.
And there are research reports from the Soviet Union, for example, using psychokinesis to stop the heartbeat of small animals.
Right.
I mean, obviously this might lead to other things, but surely the martial arts traditions have cultivated these things and discovered them long ago.
Right, a long time ago in the legends. And it is true that O-Sensei, the founder of Aikido, lived to the age of 86. He died in 1969 in April. And the last 5 years of his life, many films were taken of him, and videotapes and so forth that are on tape now. And you yourself can look at the films. They're not just legends. He does some absolutely incredible things. And of course, the legends are even more incredible. That this is back in when he was a young man, he actually dodged bullets.
Yeah.
He said that a very small blue light comes out of the barrel of the gun just as the person holding the gun has the intention to fire. So when he sees a blue ball comes out, he dodges. And, you know, there are witnesses to it. I just don't like to get into those kind of arguments and discussions. But I do know that he performed feats that have been witnessed by reliable witnesses in historic time and filmed. And those are truly remarkable. So I'm no longer so gaga about the whole business of paranormal. It just, if you'll accept it, it can become part of your life.
Well, it seems to me that one of the issues is this issue of acceptance, because in our culture where we have two forces going at each other, it's almost seemed to me that people don't want to deal with the paranormal, because if one of your enemies has it, they can read your mind, they can predict where you're going to be, they could stop your heartbeat. So we've almost entered into a kind of a conspiracy, given these larger premises of this push-push culture, that we better all forget that we have these abilities.
We better not have them. That's exactly what I say. I once played a game with about 6 people. We all got together, and I said, now let's just imagine that in this room we're just doing something, and we chance upon that particular formula, that strategic positioning of elements, that incantation, a chant or whatever, by which we gain zero gravity. Now, how do we handle it? And then we did a scenario on what happens. Now, of course, if we gain, right in this room, the two of us, if we figured out on this show how to use zero gravity, we better not do it on this show. But what that meant
sit
is,
about 3 feet above the chairs.
what it basically meant is, what it means is that we would have almost infinite power, because we could get great, huge pistons and just have them go up and down, and we would have absolutely entropy-free
energy. That's right.
In other words, anybody who owned that could rule the world.
Well, they'd be on their way. They'd be well on their way.
They would have the power. I mean, you could levitate the Pentagon or anything you want to do. But what would you do with it? And so then we spent a time saying, it's this group right here. So how do we proceed? And it was very interesting, because these were very nice people. But within the next 2 hours, people were in rancorous discussions. They were very angry.
It brought out the vicious side of them somehow.
Well, the confused side. In other words, what would you do with infinite power? It's a terrifying question. And what would you do just with a little bit of power, which so-called psychic phenomena have, like being able to bend metal? You know, there's a worm gear that puts out the flaps on planes. If you just bent that the slightest bit, it would not work. And maybe one flap would extend, the other would not. The plane would go into an uncontrollable spin and go into the earth. Now, I don't want that to be. So maybe the real...
So maybe you're using your power to keep other people from developing theirs.
Well,
or somehow collectively, this is what we are doing
that's
with our
a conspiracy,
power.
yes. But the distinction I make is all of those powers, and don't forget the word power came from a French and Latin root meaning to be able.
Oh.
It doesn't mean power over others. I like to think of it as our ableness to achieve our potential. The kinds of powers which I call benign are basically what you would call the passive rather than active. That is being able to find magnetic north,
Yes.
to sense other people at a
Yeah.
distance, to be more sensitive to other human beings' feelings. One of the exercises I have in the Silent Pulse is to try to get in touch with, if you have the courage for it, someone who's starving in Africa.
Yeah.
And then through that kind of empathy, then to give you the energy to go ahead and create some kind of social justice. That the real challenge today is not developing extraordinary powers, but using those powers we have to create social justice.
I think it was the Buddhists who felt that empathy was really the highest of the
Right.
powers or the spiritual gifts.
And actually, as I say, these things which have come out of the martial arts, out of Aikido, these gifts, whatever, these special siddhi or powers, are not nearly so important as the learning which has to do with balance and centeredness.
Well, it's interesting that the martial arts did develop in the Orient and came out of these very spiritual cultures, the Buddhist traditions and the
Right.
Taoist traditions, so that they've always had a different attitude, really, I suppose, even before Aikido, a different attitude than
Always,
we would
yes.
have had in the West.
That's right, and there's a very basic idea which I think is terribly needed in our culture. That is the idea of practice, of a way.
Yeah.
Do or Dao, Do in Japanese, Dao in Chinese. It means,
Like in dojo? Or?
the place of the way. That's what that means. It means literally a path or road. Now this is the path which you trod in your life. Your practice is your path. People say, yes, George, but what are you practicing for? Now in that very question lies the confusion in the West. Yes, on my path, I do find a lot of marvelous things. I get conditioning, I get more confidence, I make friends, I have a social group, but those are all incidental. The important thing is simply the practice itself. O-sensei of Aikido said, where there is no Buddha, where there is no way, the nations perish. And I think in this culture, where anybody who's 35 years and younger has been brought up in a media world which shows us a view of reality in which there are nothing but a series of climactic moments.
It's a cacophony of different competing pluralistic impulses, unrelated
but
to
there
each
is
other.
one very related, one very coherent idea, and that is that reality consists of a series of climactic moments.
Climactic moments.
Look at your commercials next time you go. Every one of them is a little epiphany, a little climax, almost
yeah.
all of them.
All right.
Just check how many of them do. A half-hour show, at the end something happens.
Yeah.
Always happens. Actually, and then we're told that winning is what counts. It doesn't matter how you get across the goal, just get across the goal. I don't want to know what happened in between. Don't tell me how you sold that ad, just sell it.
Winning isn't the only thing, it's everything, right?
So the truth of the matter is that the winning and the little spurts upward in your practice, they are incidental. Mainly you're on a plateau. Now this is a very difficult concept for our culture to grasp, to get its mind around. But
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with it myself.
okay, you know what the learning curve is like.
Yeah.
The learning curve goes like this, and you have a little apparent growth in learning, a spurt upward.
Okay.
And then it levels off and goes down slightly, and you have another plateau. Just like that.
I see.
Okay. What we seem to want in our culture is an endless series of upward spurts. That's just not possible.
Onward and upward.
That's not possible. Most of life is on the plateau.
Yeah.
Because while you're on the plateau, the essential, delightful, wonderful learning is taking place. It just doesn't show.
Yeah.
At the end, there's a little spurt of apparent learning. When what you have learned takes effect, and that stage is over, and then it's released to a bit
So
of
staying
growth.
on the path for you involves being with that process rather than looking for the next thrill so that you can move onward and upward quickly.
Exactly. And what would be the only way that people could, apparently, for a while, stay on that series of climactic moments? What would it be?
By jumping around from one thing to another. I should
That's
say.
one, the dabbler who goes from one thing
I
to
mean,
the other.
sexually, for example, it's the
Right.
thrill of a new romance
Right,
always.
always. But there's one way, that, especially people in the ghetto, people who don't have too many advantages, drugs.
Yeah, drugs.
Something like cocaine or speed
Sure.
or anything like that. You can have the illusion of being on a quick high, another quick high, and of course, pretty soon you crash.
Yeah.
But I think this all really applies to these extraordinary powers, because I think that before we start really trying to develop those, make that our primary national or international priority, the important thing is to learn how to live on a path, to live without those illusory climaxes and thrills, and just to really stay on the path, to be balanced, to be centered, to strive for social justice, to develop empathy and greater sensitivity to other people. And those things are really so much more important than developing special powers. Now,
It's sort of the holistic sense of
Yes.
things, or the warnings that we've always had from the oriental traditions, that you get lost in these powers.
Yes.
That if
There's
they
an old
become an
saying.
end unto themselves, it's
Right.
you're missing out on
there's
something.
a Hindu saying, moksha before siddhi, meaning awakening before powers. And we don't want to totally renounce the powers. They're a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
But the really important thing is balance, center, empathy and feeling for others, and the ongoing struggle for justice in the world. Now, how the hell did we get on that?
I don't know, but it sounds beautiful
Right.
and all of that. It's really a marvelous thing to be able to integrate all of that into one's lifetime, and it's not easy.
No,
in
it
this
really
culture.
isn't.
Not everybody can be a martial artist.
No, but you don't have to be a martial artist. You see, I think we're all, in a sense, we're warriors. We can take the warrior ideal. I mean, not the kind of warrior who goes to war, but Castaneda's warrior. The Don Juan
What
idea.
is that, briefly, because we're running out of time?
Well, it's briefly someone who lives for service. The idea of service is really right there. Someone who lives intensely in the moment. And often it's said someone who lives in full awareness of his own death.
Full
Because
awareness of
with
his
that
own death.
awareness, you really don't have time to be sullen or to be depressed or to go around preening your ego. To live clearly and cleanly in the moment, to develop your powers fully and your potential, and to achieve your bestowed mission on this planet.
Well, George, I think in some way you're able to demonstrate that to me just in speaking. It's such a pleasure to be here
Thank you
with
very
you.
much.
We've really been able to cover a lot of ground, ranging from the paranormal to really the philosophical underpinnings of this
Right.
work that you're doing, George. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a PDF copy or order a beautiful printed copy of issue 6 of the new Thinking Aloud magazine.